Hey everybody, this is Regan Becker with Churn Zero. Excited to be chatting with you guys today and appreciate you hopping on the line to learn a little bit more about why surveys should be owned by customer success. We'll just give everybody about 30 seconds here to get logged in and get your lunch or your coffee, depending on where you are, and then we can get started from there. So just hang with me for a few seconds and then we'll jump right into it. Okay, so looks like we've got a good number of attendees here, so we'll go ahead and kick things off and appreciate you joining the webinar today on why surveys should be owned by customer success. As I mentioned, I'm Regan Becker and I'm an account executive here at Churn Zero, and excited to talk to you a little bit around some of the context around why surveys should be owned by customer success. And we're going to start by kicking off around building a survey strategy and really enhancing your survey strategy to make sure that it's most useful for customer success team, as well as collaborating with the results that we're getting across those different departments, and why customer success is the best suited department to really execute the strategy through collaboration. The third thing I'm going to touch on here is really when to use surveys throughout the customer lifecycle, which is really important when we're thinking about achieving maximum impact through this. And then we will leave some time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have any questions during today's session, you can feel free to put them in the questions pane, and I'll get to as many of those as I can at the end. As an added bonus, and at the risk of alienating any Trekkies on the call, we have to honor May 4th, I think, as well. So we'll be sprinkling in a few Star Wars references as well in honor of today. But with that, let's go ahead and actually kick things off. I'd like to actually start with a poll, and that's around our first question. What surveys are actually owned by customer success in your organization today? So if you all want to take a moment and take time to respond to that, we'll give everybody a minute to get in their results, and then we'll review those together and move forward. Looks like we got a lot of good results coming in, and a pretty good mix here. So let's go ahead and actually pull up the results. And this is great. We have a really nice mix of folks. It looks like almost half of you are using NPS right now, which is great, and almost half of you are not doing any. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the different surveys that we think about here at Churn Zero, but love to see this mix. So I think there will be something for everyone as we go through. I do want to spend some time not only talking about NPS, but also some of the other types of surveys throughout, and really make that case for why it's useful to have customer success own all of those surveys as well. So that's going to really bring us actually to our first topic here. And that's really around building a survey strategy. So when we think about building the survey strategy, start with the basics, right? What type of survey should we actually be delivering to our customers? And this is something that I, as someone that chats with customer success leaders every day, it comes up a lot. People are always asking me, how can I do a better job? Which surveys should I be using? And how can I get away from depending on marketing or another department to actually deliver these surveys? It's great to see that almost half of you are using and familiar with NPS, but I think a lot of times customer satisfaction surveys and even customer effort score surveys kind of get lost in the overall strategy. So, when we think about building out the strategy first and foremost, as I mentioned, the first thing is to really identify what's going to be the most impactful type of survey based on what we're trying to measure. So that's going to really depend on what we want to deploy. Kind of like Luke Skywalker, if he tried to use, not an X-wing, but maybe, another spaceship to destroy the first Death Star, he might not have had as much success. So we want to make sure we have the right tools for the job. So when we're thinking about that on a really high level, the first thing is, as a general rule, think of NPS as your best bet when you're really trying to measure customer loyalty and identify potential expansion opportunities. Customer satisfaction is really going to be more so for those specific interactions that we measure. Obviously, a lot of us think of that as more of a support-oriented type of survey, but going to talk a little bit further around, why customer success should own that after we deploy that survey, even if it's in response to a closed ticket, for example. And then customer effort score surveys, which I think are probably the least widely deployed, at least based on our survey results here, or our poll results. That's really going to tell us how easy or how difficult a customer finds a process. So product sometimes uses this to better understand things like how easy has someone found it to maybe do a self-service upgrade, or upgrade from a free trial to a paid subscription with us. And we really want to make sure that we're paying attention to that customer experience as well. Now, regardless of which type of survey that you're using, we always want to tie it to your strategy and the organizational goals that are underlying that. This is one of the ways that customer success can start to get more of a seat at the table, especially as we continue to develop as a discipline, and really, bring insights to our C-suite and executive team as we're building this out. So an example of this, we talk a lot about churn as customer success professionals. If that's our North Star, we might deploy a survey with a goal of understanding why customers are churning so that you can reduce the churn rate by 3%. And so for these survey results to really be meaningful, we also want to think about how can we maximize engagement on that. One of the ways to do this, obviously we want to make sure that we're deploying these surveys at the right time, but also thinking about how you deploy the surveys. So most of us are familiar with email surveys, very useful because it can be achieved with a lot of different types of tools. You don't need a dedicated customer success platform, but to truly maximize engagement, you also might want to consider delivering surveys through an in-app message. So that could be something that comes from a customer success platform. Many support tools also have this built in when we look at customer satisfaction surveys, because these are ultimately going to catch the engagement of our customers when they're in their normal flow, they're already in our application, and it ultimately increases higher response rates. And then the last thing, which is the golden rule, and you're going to hear me harp on it throughout today for different reasons, is to make sure that you follow up on your surveys. Whether someone is giving you a great response, or maybe they're providing you feedback that there's still some work to do, you want to make sure that your customers are feeling heard. They took the time to actually fill out the survey. So it's not only going to make them more likely to respond in the future if we're following up, but it can also ultimately impact that customer's likelihood to renew. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that follow-up should look like shortly. But now I want to switch gears a little bit to why it's so important for customer success to own surveys. And as a reminder, for those of you who may have joined us late, if you do have any questions, I'll get to those at the end, and you can feel free to insert those in the questions pane. So why is it so important for customer success to own surveys? And this starts with thinking about the types of results that we're going to get from just deploying a survey in the first place. So take NPS, which 42% of you are already doing today and owning this. It's going to provide us a bunch of numbers. And while these are really useful to help us understand the overall picture, we're all measured on net retention. A lot of us are measured on things like upsell, adoption, and these particular numbers aren't really going to give us the why behind the scores. They're really only going to give us the how. So while these are useful for benchmarking our results, this is really where the CS team and that follow-up becomes really important and a crucial element of that, because we should not just be focused on the score itself. We should also be thinking about why, our detractors, for example, feel like we're missing the mark and act on those areas. There's also plenty of ways to actually artificially inflate an NPS score. And so we want to make sure that we're actually engaging with customers where they are on that side. And if we place the focus there, we're going to get those increased benchmarks, and the results will rise as a natural flow from there. So when we think about other aspects of why customer success should own surveys, we have to think about where customer success kind of sits in the overall organization. So the top performing CS teams that I'm speaking with on a daily basis are really the nexus between sales, support, product, marketing. They're obviously the closest to our customers, and it puts customer success in a unique position because not only are they the closest to the customer and often able to get a better, more detailed view of the situation relative to other departments, but they're also that focal point when we're thinking about following up. Your customer success managers are those individuals who your customers are already familiar with. They know and they feel more comfortable with. So we want to make sure that we're keeping a consistent customer experience by having the CSM kind of own that follow-up and think about how can we then do things to impact these other customers based on those responses that we're getting. So owning the survey process is ultimately going to ensure that customer success can engage at the right time by being aware of different things like the renewal date, competitive options. If we have a neutral customer that is neither telling us they're a promoter or that they're a detractor, they're going to be open to alternatives. So having customer success already engaged when we're getting those responses back helps us to assess the likelihood of that customer ultimately to renew or churn, and helps us put together a good plan in terms of how to approach the renewal conversation if that's coming up soon. Now, of course, outside of just benefiting customer success, when we think about why we should own these processes, we also want to think about how can we impact other departments across the organization. So I mentioned customer success sort of as the nexus between product, support, sales, and marketing. And when we get responses back, we're always wanting to ask an open-ended follow-up question so that we can get more information about why are we getting the score that we're getting. And those responses and those open-ended questions can impact a lot of different areas of our business. Even when we think about a customer satisfaction or CSAT survey, which is traditionally owned by support, the follow-up that we're getting, the actual feedback, may actually provide us with relevant and important information for other departments, whether that be product, sales, or marketing. So it only makes sense that customer success is going to own that follow-up and be the conduit through which we're actually continuing to share this information and collaborate with other departments. If a survey response includes a feature request, for example, thinking about the product side of things, customer success should ultimately be following up with customers who we've seen request that feature, who have mentioned that feature previously. They might need additional training, they might need additional documentation. And so being able to have customer success own that creates a great customer experience for the folks that we're working with on that side. Similarly, if we think about it from the support side, if we're seeing an overwhelming number of tickets from a customer and a survey response maybe indicates to us that the customer is finding a specific area of the platform difficult to adopt. Not only can we impact the support queue by getting them the correct information at the right time and ultimately reduce tickets, but also this really allows us to re-engage as a CSM to give them the training, point them to the knowledge base where they can understand how to optimize their use of that specific product area. Similarly with sales and marketing, obviously, positive feedback that helps me every day as a salesperson to help me know where should I be focusing my energy. And that's something that my customer success team actually feeds me here at Churn Zero. Which industries are doing really well? How are we looking across a specific type of client profile so that we can really start to leverage that information not only on the customer success side, but again, impacting across the organization with even new business. And finally, marketing, when we're getting survey responses back, this is a great opportunity if we have people that like our product, that feel like it's easy to use, for us to engage from more of a marketing perspective, thinking about the reviews and the case studies that we might want to be able to get out of those particular things. And so ultimately, when we're thinking about the holistic view into surveys overall, owning the surveys is really going to allow the CSMs to better communicate across their book of business while knowing where to spend their time and why, while also, thinking about how can we make a bigger impact across the big business, give customer success even more a seat at the table with our executive team in the C-suite. So with that, before we move into kind of the next phase, want to talk a little bit about how do we make sure that surveys are impactful both for internal as well as external stakeholders. And that starts with basically the tools that you're using to deliver surveys and how you use them. So I want to bring up our second poll for the day, which is going to go into how do you actually send surveys today? Do you have a tool in place? Or is that something that's pretty manual for you? So we'll give everyone a moment to respond to that as well, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so looks like we still have a couple coming in. Let's go ahead and close off that survey and we'll see where things stand today. So 46% of you are using a dedicated survey tool. That is awesome to hear. Shows that the organization's really involved in making sure that you're hearing what's going on with your customers. Obviously, we have a good cohort here as well, almost half that is using either Google Forms or another system. And only 8 of you using a CS platform. So, love this mix here. I think there's pros and cons to some of these different approaches, and want to talk a little bit about the impact that using a CS platform in particular can bring when we're thinking about these particular surveys. So let's go ahead and switch back to think about what really is the purpose of these surveys. And this gets back to why customer success should own them as well. There was a McKinsey study that was done, and they found that organizations that measure the entire customer lifecycle see a 20% increase in customer satisfaction and up to a 15% increase in revenue, which is really important when we think about how do we actually want to deploy those surveys, but even more so, when do we want to deploy surveys. So, unfortunately, many even dedicated survey solutions make it a little bit more difficult to easily deploy surveys at important steps throughout the customer lifecycle. So I want to wrap up here by looking at when surveys should actually be deployed to achieve maximum impact. So when we think about whether your CS department is responsible for the entire customer lifecycle, post-sale, or even if there are other teams involved, this is going to be really key to really drive revenue, uncover potential churn risks, and ultimately enable a proactive approach to customer engagement. When we look at the optimal times to deploy surveys, there's a few different opportunities that stand out. And I know a lot of you are using NPS. I want to talk a little bit about each of these surveys and when you might want to deploy them from the customer lifecycle perspective. So first, thinking about consistent customer lifecycle points. That's when you want to use an NPS survey. So that could be maybe post onboarding or training, before or after the renewal process. Those are going to really give us a gauge around how likely the customer is to be a promoter and obviously recommend our product. Deploying a survey, for example, like right after onboarding, is not only going to provide us pertinent feedback on that specific process so that we can make any tweaks maybe, or even measure improvements in our overall onboarding and time to value for our customers, but we're also going to be able through that to have customer success be more proactive if someone did or didn't, for that matter, have a positive experience, and in particular by automating some of that follow-up. Another area to consider is thinking about specific interactions. That could be something like a ticket where we're going to deploy a customer satisfaction survey right after that. So that's going to take out a lot of the noise around why are they actually giving us the score. We want to make sure that we're following up right away with that. And then it's going to automatically also ensure, as customers open tickets throughout different parts of their life cycle, that we're spreading out these surveys as well and mitigating survey fatigue. And then lastly, when we think about customer effort score surveys. So after a self-service interaction, like an upgrade or even a new feature launch, this is going to help give the CSMs visibility into how easy or difficult our customers find these processes, and then get involved as needed. All of these are really going to be much more impactful as opposed to a random NPS survey every 6 months, because it's going to provide us more insight into specific experiences. Where do we have an opportunity to improve? So ideally, we can use a platform to automate these processes, and that way customer success can continue focusing on proactive engagement as opposed to fighting fires. So with that, a few different takeaways that I just want to wrap up with. First and foremost, make sure that you're tying any of your surveys to organizational goals. If you're not sure where to start, obviously, focusing on your KPIs, net retention, customer churn is a great spot, but also that's a good opportunity to get your executive team involved from that perspective. Secondly, make sure you're using overall results to adapt processes and enable that proactive outreach from the CSMs through follow-up. Make sure you're measuring it throughout the customer lifecycle so we can make sure that we're maximizing our ability to provide value to our customers, increase revenue and overall customer satisfaction. And always follow up, always follow up. That way the customer is going to feel heard. It'll improve survey engagement in the future. So, with that, I'm going to open it up to specific questions, but I do want to leave you at the risk of alienating any Trekkies on the call with one last thought, and that is may the 4th be with you as you're building this out. So let's get into a few questions. I know we only have about 5 minutes left here, but I'm going to go ahead and take a look at what we have here today. So the first question I'm seeing here is, as we release our first ever NPS survey. Well, congratulations, first and foremost. This person's asking, how do we benchmark results? That's a great question and one I get all the time. There's really two different ways that we can look at benchmarking NPS results. We can think about it both in terms of external benchmarks and internal benchmarks. So those external benchmarks are really going to be dependent on your specific industry as far as what a good NPS score is, but they're useful insofar, I guess, as you can see where you fall relative to your peers. But that said, I actually recommend typically focusing more on internal benchmarks because you're ultimately going to start wherever you start. That might be good, bad, compared to the rest of your industry. But what's important is making sure that we're setting realistic goals around where do we want to get to. And again, tying those back to the organizational goals. So, some ways that you can do that, especially as you're first starting out with your NPS surveys, is making sure that you're doing them at those specific points throughout the customer lifecycle so they're meaningful, and you can get benchmarks around each of those different processes. And then also, another great way is to think about separating out NPS surveys based on who you're actually surveying at the customer. So how do our end users feel about their experience versus maybe our executive sponsors on that side? Let me see what other questions we have here. How can we incorporate survey results into customer health? So I love this question. Get a CS tool? No, but it's going to depend somewhat, I guess, on your engagement model. But I'm a big believer in having survey results be at least part of your overall customer health. How your engagement model works is going to be a little bit dependent on how much we want to do that. So if you're a high touch team, maybe surveys are not as large of a component of your overall customer health score because you're really talking with your customers on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. But for low touch teams, it does tend to be a bigger indicator because we're also dependent on things like usage, and we're just not getting as much face-to-face time. But if you're thinking about incorporating survey results into customer health, the number one thing that I'd say is don't make it an all or nothing, right? So don't make it, hey, if they never respond to a survey, we're not going to give them anything, right? And don't make it, oh, if they give us a 10 out of 10 on an NPS and they're a promoter, they get everything. If they give us anything else, they're a 0. We want to make sure that we have gradations in there. So maybe setting that up where our promoters are going to get 10 out of 10 points for that factor. Our neutrals maybe get 5 out of 10, and then our detractors get 0 out of 10. That way, you'll be able to better understand, where that fits as an aspect. And really, you should be reviewing those scores quarterly anyway, so that you can make sure that you're adjusting as needed. So I think I have time for one more. Let me see here. And I'll follow up as well with answers to the rest of these that we don't get to. But someone asked here a little clarification on own. Are you talking about scheduling and executing surveys, being aware that they're being sent, analyzing results, ensuring that they're accountable for follow-up? I would say really all of those, right? The last thing that we want, and this probably goes back even to support tickets, right? If you have disparate systems and customer success is not owning that, you might get into a call where you have no idea that they've even been sent a survey, that they've even been responding to that. And we want to make sure that we don't get caught off guard by that. It really hurts the overall customer experience when we do that. So I'd say, really all of the above, making sure that we're really owning that. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I'm sorry that I did not get to all the questions, but we'll definitely follow up with you as I can. And make sure that you join us. We do have another upcoming Impact webinar on May the 18th on what customer success reports boards want to see. So that's going to be with my colleague Arya. He's great, brings a lot of energy, and hope you can join us for that. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.